I've never written something like this before. Honestly, I don't even know if I should be putting it out there, but every time I try to sleep, I see his face. And if I don't let this out, if I don't share what happened to me, I'm terrified he'll come back. People think horror is just a story, some clever fiction someone types up in a dim room for the thrill of others. But what happened to me at the Graveward wasn't a story. It was a memory carved into my bones. It started about 3 years ago when I was working the night shift at a small cemetery just outside a quiet town in Pennsylvania. You wouldn't believe how many cemeteries still employ night guards. My official title was groundskeeper, but in reality it was just babysitting tombstones. The graveyard wasn't big, maybe 200 graves, with iron gates at the front and an old chapel at the back. There was a stone path running through the middle, with oak trees leaning in like ancient watchers. When I first took the job, my friends laughed. "What's there to guard, zombies?" they joke. But the truth is, graveyards get plenty of trespassers, drunk teens, vandals, people trying to film cheap horror TikToks. And I needed the money. My wife was pregnant at the time, and the thought of bringing in steady income, even if it meant staying awake while others slept, felt worth it. The first few nights were uneventful. I'd sit in the tiny shack by the gate, sip coffee from a thermos, and listen to the wind scrape through the branches. Sometimes I'd walk the paths with a flashlight just to stretch my legs. It was peaceful, in a strange way. But by the third week, I noticed something odd. Every night, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., I'd catch sight of someone standing far back near the chapel. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but then one night I saw it clearly. A man, tall and unnaturally thin, wearing a black coat that reached down to his ankles. His head always tilted slightly, like he was studying something no one else could see. The moment my flashlight beam reached him, he'd vanish, not walk away, just gone. I kept telling myself it had to be someone messing with me, maybe a homeless guy, maybe a prankster, but then the pattern got worse. No matter what path I walked, no matter what angle, I'd glimpse him at the edge of my vision. By the 5th night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, frustrated, I decided to chase him. I spotted him standing between 2 tall headstones, facing me directly this time. His face was pale, too pale, almost glowing under the moonlight. His eyes were sunken, black pits, yet I could feel his stare piercing me. My breath hitched, but I forced myself forward. "Hey!" I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. I bolted toward him, boots crunching against gravel, my flashlight bouncing wildly. I must have run 40 feet in seconds, heart hammering in my throat. But when I got there, nothing. Just the cold air, the smell of damp soil, and silence so heavy it pressed into my ears. That was the first night I thought about quitting. But bills pile up fast, and I convinced myself I was overtired. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the long hours and caffeine were messing with my head. A week later, I realized it wasn't my imagination. It was a stormy night, rain lashing against the gate, when I saw him again. Only this time, he wasn't standing by the chapel. He was standing inside the shack with me. I swear to God I hadn't heard the door creak, hadn't felt a shift in the air. I just turned my head, and there he was, leaning in the corner, dripping wet, that long coat trailing puddles on the floor. His face was sharper up close, like skin stretched too tightly over bone. His lips curled into something that could have been mistaken for a smile, except it was too wide, too unnatural. I froze. My hand hovered over the radio, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. He whispered something, but the words came out garbled, like static in an old TV. Then, he was gone. No sound, no trace, just the faint smell of earth and rot. I told myself I imagined it, but when I looked down, I saw wet footprints leading to the corner where he'd stood. From that night forward, I stopped sitting in the shack. I kept moving, kept walking, as if the constant motion would keep him from catching up. But he always did. Sometimes I'd see him behind a tree, sometimes by the gate. Once, I swear, I saw him standing on top of a grave mound, his head tilted, watching me like a hawk about to strike. sleep became impossible. Even during the day, when I tried to nap, I'd jolt awake, convinced I saw him in the shadows of my room. My wife noticed how pale I'd gotten, how jumpy I was. But what was I supposed to say? Honey, I think a ghost won't leave me alone. The breaking point came one night when I found a grave that shouldn't have been there. I was making my rounds, flashlight sweeping the rows, when I spotted fresh dirt near the northern fence. A grave, but not one I recognized. The headstone looked old, weathered, as though it had been there for decades. But I knew every inch of that cemetery. I'd mowed the grass, trimmed the weeds. That grave hadn't been there before. My chest tightened. I forced myself closer. The inscription on the stone was almost illegible, worn by time, but I made out 2 words carved deep. The Watcher. I didn't realize I'd dropped my flashlight until I bent down to grab it, hands trembling. When I stood back up, he was standing directly behind the headstone. This time he spoke clearly. His voice was low, guttural, like the grinding of a coffin lid. "You're late." I staggered back, my legs giving out beneath me. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, he was gone. Only the grave remained, damp soil sinking slightly as if something inside had just shifted. The next morning, I tried to report it to my boss. I didn't mention the man, just the mysterious grave. But when I brought him to the spot, nothing. The grass was untouched, no grave, no headstone, no sign of fresh soil. My boss gave me a long look and told me to take the night off. But I knew what I saw. That night I dreamed of the grave. I dreamed of being lowered into it, soil piling on top of me as the Watcher stood above, whispering the same words over and over. "You're late. You're late. You're late." When I woke up, my wife said I'd been thrashing, gasping for air, clawing at my own chest. The final night I worked there, I made a choice I regret every day. I went back, determined to face him, to prove to myself he wasn't real, or to end whatever curse he'd laid on me. At exactly 2:45 a.m., I stood by the chapel, flashlight in one hand, shovel in the other. I don't know why I brought the shovel. Maybe because deep down, I knew what he wanted. I didn't have to wait long. He appeared at the edge of the chapel steps, pale face glowing, lips curled into that unnatural grin. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand and pointed toward the ground. And there it was again, the grave. Fresh, damp soil waiting for me. My hands shook, but I dug. I don't know why. Maybe I was compelled. Maybe I was insane. Maybe the grave had been meant for me all along. The deeper I dug, the colder the air got until I could see my breath clouding in the beam of the flashlight. Finally, the shovel struck something solid. Wood. A coffin. My pulse roared in my ears. With trembling hands, I pried it open, and inside, staring up at me with wide, lifeless eyes, was me. My own face, my own body. And the Watcher's whisper, colder than the grave itself, filled my ears one last time. "You're late." I've never told anyone this story outside of a single late-night post on a forum that eventually got deleted. Maybe that was for the best. People don't want the truth when it's darker than their imagination. They just want a neat story, a jump scare, something to talk about before bed. But this wasn't a story. This was my life. And every night I hear it, like a dull echo from beneath the ground, the bell. When I was 24, broke and desperate, I took a caretaker job at an abandoned cemetery in Vermont. Unlike most graveyards, this one wasn't attached to a church. It sat alone on a hill, surrounded by pine woods that creaked even when the air was still. Nobody had been buried there in decades. The town had long since moved on to a newer cemetery closer to the church. But still, someone was paying the town to keep the old one maintained, and my job was to keep vandals away. The first time I saw the cemetery, I thought it looked wrong. Not scary, just wrong, like a photograph that's slightly tilted but you can't figure out why. The tombstones leaned in awkward angles, many of them cracked or sunken. But what disturbed me most were the bells. Every single grave had one. Little iron bells mounted on thin poles, with frayed cords leading down into the earth, tied to the coffins below. It was an old custom, I learned. Back in the 1800s, when people feared being buried alive, they'd tie a cord to the dead person's wrist. If the dead person woke up underground, they could ring the bell for help. That's why the cemetery was called Graveward Hollow. Most of the bells were rusted, broken, dangling like rotted teeth, but some still stood, fragile and sharp against the skyline. My boss told me not to worry about them. Kids pull the cord sometimes, try to spook people, he said. Ignore it. The first 2 nights were quiet. I sat in my pickup with the heater running, headlights cutting into the fog that always seemed to roll down from the woods. I walked the grounds a few times with a flashlight, crunching over dead leaves, but saw nothing unusual. On the 3rd night, though, it happened. I was sitting in the truck, half asleep, when I heard it. The bell. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a faint tink, 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 carried on the wind. At first I thought it was the storm rattling metal, but then it grew louder, clearer. Not random, not from the wind. Someone was ringing it. I got out of the truck, flashlight in hand, my breath smoking in the cold. The sound echoed across the graveyard, tinny and metallic, bouncing between the stones. I followed it, weaving through the rows of graves, my boots sinking slightly into damp soil. Finally I found it. The bell. Shiny compared to the others, polished somehow, though I swore it had been rusted when I first saw it. The cord quivered, taut, as though someone below was yanking on it desperately. I froze. My rational brain screamed, it's a prank, kids are hiding, they rigged it. But every hair on my body stood on end. Against my better judgment, I knelt beside the grave. The headstone was so worn I could barely make out the name, Elias Ward. The cord shook violently, pulling the bell harder. Tink, 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 tink. I should have left. Should have run back to my truck, driven away, quit the job, never looked back. But something in me, curiosity, dread, I don't know, made me put my ear to the ground. And that's when I heard it. Not just the bell. A voice, muffled, ragged, gasping. Help. Please. Let me out. I stumbled back, my chest seizing. I wanted to scream, but the air caught in my throat. My flashlight beam jittered across the grave, and for one horrific second, I saw the soil shift, as though something beneath it had just pressed upward. I ran. I don't remember how long. When I reached the truck, I locked the doors and sat there trembling until dawn. By the time I worked up the courage to return to that grave, the bell was rusted again, dangling lifelessly. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a hallucination from lack of sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't one bell. It was 3. 3 different graves, all ringing in uneven rhythms like a broken orchestra. Tink, 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 tink. I didn't dare go closer. I just stood at the edge of the path, flashlight flickering, heart pounding as the sound rose and rose. And then it stopped, dead silent. Except for one voice that floated up from the dark. We're not dead. After that night, I begged my boss to reassign me. He laughed it off, told me I was too imaginative, that kids were probably setting up fishing lines to mess with me. I quit the job a week later. But the story doesn't end there, because the bells followed me. I first noticed it at home, a week after I quit. I was lying in bed with my girlfriend when I heard it outside the window. Faint, almost imperceptible. Tink. I sat up, heart slamming. Did you hear that? I whispered. Hear what? She mumbled, half asleep. The sound didn't come again that night. But 2 days later, when I was taking out the trash, I heard it from the woods behind my apartment. A single bell ringing slowly. Tink, tink, tink. It grew more frequent. At the grocery store, in the laundromat, even at work. Always faint, always distant, but always there. One night, desperate, I drove back to the cemetery. I thought maybe if I confronted it, it would end. The place was darker than I remembered, the trees like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. The bells started the moment I stepped out of the truck. Not faint this time, deafening. 100 iron bells clanging, cords rattling violently as if the dead were tearing at their restraints. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, screaming, "What do you want from me?" And then silence. Every single bell stopped at once. I looked up, trembling. And I swear to you, I saw them. Dozens of pale hands breaking through the dirt, clawing upward, cords tied to their wrists, bells swaying wildly above, faces sunken and gasping, pushing through the soil, eyes staring at me with a hunger that no living thing should ever have. I bolted, but as I reached my truck, one final bell rang out, sharp, clear, cutting through the night like glass shattering. It came from inside my truck. Dangling from the rearview mirror was a small iron bell, cord trailing down into the floorboards. I ripped it off, threw it into the woods and sped away, heart hammering, lungs burning. But it didn't matter, because when I got home, there it was again, hanging from my ceiling fan, then in my bathroom, then inside my closet. No matter where I go, the bell follows. It's been years now, and I've stopped running. I don't bother explaining it to anyone anymore. They'd never believe me. Every night before I sleep, I hear the faint tink, 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 as if the graves are calling me back. And sometimes when I'm very still, I can hear the voices beneath the ringing. And they don't say, "Help," anymore. They say my name. I inherited a house I never wanted. It came from my uncle, who died alone in upstate New York, far away from the rest of our family. I barely knew the man. He was reclusive, strange, the kind of relative you only hear rumors about at Thanksgiving dinners. People whispered that he worked as a gravedigger once, though no one was sure for which cemetery. What everyone agreed on was this: Uncle Walter wasn't right in the head. Still, when the lawyer called and told me he'd left me his property, curiosity got the better of me. I was broke, living paycheck to paycheck, and the idea of owning a house, even a creepy one, was hard to pass up. So, one rainy afternoon, I drove out to see it. The house sat on the edge of a forest, sagging into itself like it had been holding its breath for too long. Paint peeled from the siding, shutters hung by single nails, and weeds grew waist-high in the yard. But it wasn't the house that caught my attention. It was what sat behind it. A graveyard. Small, maybe 20 stones at most, arranged in uneven rows. The earth was sunken in places, as though the ground itself had tired of holding its secrets. Some graves bore names, others had markers so weathered they were just lumps of stone, and near the center was a mausoleum. Small, squat, its stone door sealed with rusted chains. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The house groaned with every gust of wind, and though I'd locked every door, I kept hearing the faintest scrape of metal like something dragging across stone. Around 3 a.m., unable to take it anymore, I wandered into the study. That's when I found it. A journal. It was tucked beneath loose floorboards, leather-bound, brittle with age. The name inside the cover was written in shaky ink. Walter H. Graves. My uncle's journal. I should have stopped there, should have closed it, put it back, never let curiosity win. But of course I didn't. The entries began mundanely, complaints about money, isolation, strange dreams. But after a few pages they shifted. He began writing about the watch. At first I thought it meant he was paranoid about thieves or intruders, but the more I read, the clearer it became. He wasn't watching the graveyard. The graveyard was watching him. One entry chilled me so badly I had to shut the book for the night. They ring again tonight, not bells, never bells, something deeper, something that shakes the marrow in my bones. They want me in the ground, but I can't join them yet. I have to keep watch. If I fall asleep, they'll take me. If I stop digging, they'll rise. The next day, I told myself it was madness. My uncle was insane. Years of isolation had broken him. But when night fell again, and the house seemed to tighten around me, I couldn't resist reading more. He wrote about a pact, about how the graves weren't ordinary, how each stone marked not just a body but a debt. He claimed our family had been tied to this ground for generations, bound by something older than the town itself. And as the last surviving member, it had fallen to him to keep the dead in place. It was laughable, superstition, but then came the scratching. That night, around the same hour, I heard it clearly. Claws against wood. Not the house this time. It was coming from outside, from the yard, from the graveyard. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself out the back door. The beam sliced through the dark, catching only weeds and stones. But then, as I swept it across the row of graves, I saw it, soil shifting. Just slightly, as if something below had pressed against it. I froze, the journal's words slamming back into my head. If I stop digging, they'll rise. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and stayed awake until dawn. Over the next week, the noises got worse. Some nights it was scratching, others it was groaning, like the ground itself exhaled. Once I swear I heard whispers seeping through the walls, faint pleading words I couldn't make out. By then, I was reading the journal obsessively. My uncle detailed rituals, little tasks he performed to appease the dead. He'd dig shallow trenches around the graves, pour salt, murmur prayers in a language I didn't recognize. And then, there were his warnings. Never look into the mausoleum window. Never listen too long when they call your name. And above all, never ever answer. That line gnawed at me. On the 10th night, the whispers came louder, not muffled, not faint, clear. And worse, they were using my name. Daniel. I sat in bed, fists clutching the blanket, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Daniel, say we're waiting. Every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to respond. But something else, a pull I can't describe, drew me to the window. The graveyard glistened under the moonlight, and I saw them. Figures, pale and half-formed, standing by the stones. They swayed, as if the wind carried their bones, and though their faces were shadows, I knew their mouths were open, calling me. I shut the curtain, shaking, repeating to myself, never answer, never answer. But the worst was yet to come. A storm rolled in 2 nights later. Lightning split the sky, rain hammered the roof, and through it all came the ringing. Not bells? No. This was deeper. A sound that seemed to rattle inside my skull, vibrating through my teeth. The journal had mentioned it. When the deep sound comes, the chains won't hold them. I don't remember deciding to go outside. I just remember standing in the mud, flashlight trembling in my grip as the storm howled and the mausoleum door shook against its chains. Something inside was pounding. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Boom! The chains rattled. Boom! The stone door cracked, flakes of mortar breaking loose. I ran to the study, desperate for answers, flipping through the journal. My uncle's final entry stopped me cold. I can't hold them anymore. My blood isn't enough. If you're reading this, it means they'll take you instead. Don't fight it. Don't run. If the keeper falls, another must rise. The pounding grew louder, shaking the walls. I screamed, tearing the journal in half, throwing pages across the room. And that's when I realized the truth. The graves weren't my uncle's job. They were his prison. And by inheriting his house, by stepping foot here, I'd inherited his curse. The chains outside snapped. I heard stone grinding, the mausoleum door shifting open. I don't remember much after that, only flashes. Pale arms reaching from the mud, voices rising in a chorus of my name, the deep sound swallowing everything until I thought my skull would crack. When I woke, it was morning. The storm had passed. The mausoleum door was sealed again, chains intact, as if untouched. The graveyard was silent, but the journal was gone. And now, every night at 3 a.m., I hear the scratching again, Louder. Closer. I think I know what it means. I'm the keeper now, and one day soon, the chains will break again. I never meant to go back. I promised myself that after the first time, after everything I'd seen, I would stay away from cemeteries at night. But some things are stronger than fear. Curiosity. Guilt. The need to see what isn't meant to be seen. It started when I was working as a journalist covering small-town mysteries in Maine. A reader sent me an email with a tip, an abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of a village called Hollow Ridge. They claimed it was haunted, that locals swore the fog never lifted there, and at night you could see lanterns floating between graves, though no one ever carried them. I thought it would make a good story. A simple piece for the Halloween issue, something to draw clicks. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in graveward curses. I believed in deadlines. The cemetery was smaller than I expected, tucked behind dense woods, a thin path winding through uneven tombstones. Fog rolled in as soon as I stepped out of my car, thick and cold, clinging to my clothes. The air smelled of wet soil and decay, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I shined my flashlight, sweeping across stones cracked with age, some toppled over, others barely standing. At first, nothing happened. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head at how tense I felt. The fog made the place eerie, yes, but it was nothing supernatural. That's when I noticed it. A lantern, faint and yellow, hovering near the back row. No one was there. No one could be. The graveyard was deserted. I froze. The lantern moved slowly, gliding over the graves, never touching the ground. My instincts told me to leave, to run back to the car. But the journalist in me demanded I see more. I stepped forward, camera ready, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. The lantern stopped, right above a grave. A fresh one. I could see the soil had been disturbed, the mound smooth and wet, though no name marked it. As I raised my camera, I noticed the faint imprint of footprints around it, deep and heavy. They were human, but wrong. Too elongated, too spaced. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost imperceptible. Don't look away. I froze, stomach knotting. It wasn't coming from the fog or the wind. It was inside my head. And then a chill ran down my spine as I realized the lantern flickered each time my eyes darted away. It demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. I stepped closer. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like living fingers. Each breath came like ice, burning my lungs. And then I saw him. A figure emerging from the shadows. Tall, draped in black, his face hidden beneath a hood. But I knew him. I didn't know how, but I did. Every movement, every way he glided over the graves, reminded me of stories I'd read online. The graveward watchers, the keepers, the ones who never slept and never left. I tried to back away, but my feet felt glued to the mud. My flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged. The lantern floated closer, illuminating him fully. And for the first time I saw his face, hollow, sunken, eyes black as obsidian, skin pale, lips twisted into a grin that wasn't human. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice failed me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like gravel sliding down a coffin lid. I'm a journalist," I stammered. I just wanted a story." He tilted his head, slow, deliberate. "Stories are what bind them. Curiosity is what wakes them." The ground began to tremble, soil shifting under the stones. I watched in horror as graves cracked, small hands clawing through dirt, dragging themselves upward. They weren't fully formed, bodies half decayed, eyes empty but staring at me as though pleading or demanding. The lantern floated higher, circling the watcher like a halo of doom. Its light revealed something worse. Every grave had a bell tied to it, cords stretching down to coffins below. And with each ring of the lantern's glow, the bells jingled faintly, though no one touched them. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the village, the cemetery, the world behind. But the Watcher spoke again. You follow the lights. You answer the call. You belong. And then the twist hit me like a hammer. I looked down at the ground. The mud beneath my boots was shifting, not from the graves, but from me. A bell cord wrapped around my ankle. Slowly, inexorably, it pulled, yanking me toward the nearest mound. The lantern hovered just above it, light illuminating a wooden coffin lid that cracked under unseen pressure. I screamed, thrashing, but the cord held me. My hands clawed at the soil, but the earth was hungry, pulling me closer. I realized in horror, the Watcher, the lantern, the fog, the graves, they weren't just haunting me. They were preparing me, preparing a place for me beneath the soil, tying me into the lineage of the Keepers. Desperation gave me strength. I yanked my leg free, stumbled back, but the Watcher advanced, slow, certain, unstoppable. Each step made the fog swirl around him like water around a stone. The lantern floated beside him, casting its ghostly glow across his face. And then, the final revelation. The grave he hovered over wasn't empty. It bore a name. My name. I froze, heart hammering. The realization crushed me. This cemetery, this fog, this Watcher. It had been waiting for me. It had known I would come, had prepared the ground beneath my feet, had tied the cords around me long before I ever set foot here. I wasn't just a witness. I was the next in line. The lantern's glow illuminated the soil. It pulsed as if breathing, waiting to swallow me whole. The Watcher whispered again, calm now, patient. You were always meant to find us. Now the graveward continues. I stumbled backward, tripped over the uneven earth and fell hard. The lantern hovered directly above me, casting its light downward, reflecting in my terrified eyes. Shadows stretched across the ground like skeletal fingers. The fog thickened, closing around me until I felt suffocated. And then, everything went black. I woke hours later at the edge of the cemetery, fog lifting, lantern gone. The Watcher vanished. Every grave was intact. My heart still raced, my clothes soaked with mud and sweat. My camera was still in my hand, memory cards recording nothing but static and darkness. But I know the truth. The graveyard didn't let me die. Not yet. It sent me back to wander, to tell the story, to lure the next curious soul. And when they come, when they chase the lantern through the fog, the Watcher will be waiting. And I'll be watching too, because now I belong to the Graveward.